Liberal leader Mark Carney has decided that Canada is going to follow suit with Donald Trump's tariffs and put tariffs on any product coming into Canada that he does not have a complete 100% agreement with on their carbon footprint. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name's Sterling. I'm your host. Mark Carney was in the Soo the other day trying to shore up his position in the Liberal position, and he was at Algoma Steel, a company that has taken such an enormous hit in the last couple of years because they have completely embraced the DEI, the ESG, all of the stuff that we know most of the world has abandoned and turned away from, including the world's banking systems. Mark Carney, of course, is 100% behind all of that stuff. That's how he makes his money, by telling everybody else that they must follow ESG while he himself does not. While where he invests his money is in gasoline, in pipelines, in housing, all of the things that he believes he can leech off of the Canadian people to enrich himself while making you go back 1,000 years or 2,000 years to live in the dark ages. Now, before I get too far into that, I would just like to show you how he ended his comments, and the one Liberal supporter that he had from that region had to clap for like 5 seconds before anybody else followed suit. It was just so funny.
I look forward to your questions.
So in my mind, there's two things happening there. One, he's so boring that they just tuned him right out and they forgot what was going on, right? You know what I mean? And they heard the one guy clap for like 5 seconds and they were all like, oh, wait, has he finished? Oh, good, bravo. Of course, the other indication is that they don't care what he has to say because they know that the Liberal policies have destroyed the plant. They have destroyed it completely. If Mark Carney has his way, he will completely destroy the steel industry in Canada. But Algoma has made the foolish mistake of taking tax dollars and creating this electric furnace, which is essentially trying to make steel without any coal. And I guess it's a possibility, though it is enormous drain on the electricity. It takes enormous amounts of power, and the costs are far outstrip anything else. And that's relevant, right? Because when you hear Mark Carney talk about how Donald Trump wants to do this and Donald Trump wants to do that, one of the things that those of us that are not hysterical, we realize is that Donald Trump is trying to bring the industry back to the United States continent, making things more expensive, making it in other places, and then importing it he's going to charge you a duty. But if you build it inside of the United States, he will not. And Mark Carney, who is an ESG fanatic, who believes that all of us should do without so that he can tell the world that he's creating something that there's none of the rest of the world is participating in. So not to mention the fact that it looks like the increased levels of carbon have created 20% more vegetation in some of the world's most arid regions. I'll do a different video on the greening of the world. This one is about Mark Carney and how he is claiming that what Donald Trump is doing in the United States is somehow a personal attack on Canada. And yet Mark Carney intends to do the exact same thing when it comes to any product that he doesn't agree has a bad carbon footprint. See, Mark Carney in his book doesn't believe that you should be purchasing the item on what you can afford. He believes that you should be purchasing any item at all, including your clothes, including your toothpaste, on how much carbon that company produces and goes up into the air. Because he's that far gone, he's that far out into the fanaticism of ESG, DEI, and all of the rest of the net zero hysteria that in many cases is no longer proven to be valid. But even if it is, it's not being followed en masse by the world. We take, for example, steel. The United States is going to be manufacturing steel without having to worry about the carbon footprint. China already manufactures steel without having to worry about the carbon footprint on top of having subsidies from the government. They already are a country that is going, jobs are falling away in China by the dozens, by the hundreds because of this tariff war. They are getting crushed in China. Yet Mark Carney says that because you're making your steel a different way, you should pay a premium for Canada's steel because it's made green. Now, you take a country like Britain, who is no longer in control of their own steel industry and who needs, I think it's $3 billion bare minimum to bring their steel mills up to the same level of ARC. Do you believe that country in a fiscal jam is going to say to Canada, we'll take your steel at twice the cost and we will ignore the American steel? And appreciate what I'm trying to get you to understand. If we were sailing out of Halifax or sailing out of New York with the same amount of steel, one made in Canada, one made in the United States, nautically, that's not a big difference. I get it in a car, it's a long trip, but in the ocean, it's not really a lot. Certainly not going to it's not going to change the sailing of the ship coming out of New York to the point where the cost is going to be comparable. That product coming out of New York will still be less expensive than the stuff coming out of Canada. So if you were in that position, if you were in a country that was down on your economy was bad and you were trying to rebound and you needed to build military, you needed to build, because, Europe is trying to militarize, right? They're trying to get their army back up to snuff on individually and together. That requires a lot of steel and a lot of precious metal. If you are trying to do so, are you going to try to do so at the most expensive way possible so that while your army is fighting, they can tell themselves that, yeah, we're firing tanks and drones and everything like that, but this Jeep that I'm driving in, well, it was made with green steel. Or do you believe that they would say, you know what, let's just buy the maximum that we can buy and we'll make 4 Jeeps instead? I mean, if it were you, what would you do? But Mark Carney doesn't care about any of that, right? He's just relying on people's hysteria, people's fear, and he wants to drive this ESG into a country with really a relatively small population and a relatively small carbon footprint, not to mention some of the cleanest air on Earth.
You talk about making big polluters pay for the adoption of green technologies to make up for the lost emission cuts from getting rid of the consumer carbon price.
Yes.
But your platform makes it sound like that might be optional for companies. So can you explain to us how that's going to work?
Yeah.
Why you think that we should be doing this now when companies like this are struggling so much with the trade war and with the tariff?
Well, so there's a couple of things. And we're in Algoma, so it's a great question because we have three aspects of our climate plan that are relevant here. One is there is an industrial carbon price, but the question is what happens with the proceeds from that carbon price and to what extent is it reinvested in the industry? And we're literally about to see the reality of that as the electric car line comes on and the 70% reduction in carbon that comes from that through SIF investments, partnerships, Canada Infrastructure partnerships with the province of Ontario, and of course the drive of the workers and innovation here at Algoma. So that's an example. That's one example.
When he says SIF investments, when he says government of Ontario, when he says government, what he means is he's taking tax dollars and giving it to the owners of Algoma so that they could build that arc furnace, which will still produce steel at much more expensive, and he's still planning on adding the industrial carbon tax onto it. So he did not answer the question.
The second example, which is something we've also committed to, Alex, which is as our businesses, as our big industry decarbonize, we don't want foreign steel coming here that's high carbon, right? From Asia, from America. So we will have a carbon border adjustment mechanism that prevents that from happening.
And there we see the scam right there. He says that we're going to be putting a carbon border adjustment, just another name for a tariff, meaning any steel that comes into this country, any product that comes into this country that doesn't meet the approval of the federal government will be putting a tariff onto it, so causing expensive things to be built in Canada, meaning that you'll have to purchase Canadian steel even though it's twice the cost that you could get other steel for if there wasn't a tariff on it. How come it is that when the United States puts a tariff on Canadian steel, Mr. Carney, it's an attack on our sovereignty? Yet when you put a tariff on American steel, are we attacking their sovereignty? Or are you just lying through your teeth to make people believe anything and any time so that you can drive home your true goal of ESG, DEI, and turn Canada into this dystopian nightmare where the very few people at the top, like a banana republic, are making a lot of money and the rest of us are scraping for crickets? It makes no sense that you would slam Donald Trump, that you would blame Donald Trump for putting tariffs on any product not made in the United States so that he can have his products made in the United States. Yet, when you say that the steel made in any other country has to meet the standards of Canada, it has to be Canada's standard, You're saying that you're going to put a fancy term for a tariff, a carbon border adjustment. It means nothing. It's just empty words. It just means that we don't agree with the way you make your steel, so we're not going to allow you to sell it in this country unless we put an enormous tariff onto it, like we already have on the Chinese steel of 100%. Of course, Mark Carney doesn't care about that trade war because that trade war is not going to get him any votes. That trade war is not going to make people vote the wrong way, make people get terrified and scared because they can't see that on the television. And because Mark Carney owes the Chinese government $250 million, so he has to be very careful how he talks about them. Everybody knows that you got to be careful how you talk about certain governments, especially governments that lean Marxist. But that doesn't bother anybody in the media. So long as you give them the power to turn Canada into the nightmare that Mark Carney and a very few select of his friends will get rich off of, while the rest of us will go down, 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 destroying the middle class, destroying the productivity of the country. He admits it. He's going to put a tariff on anything not made to the standard that he believes it should be, which is only a 70% reduction. So there's still 30% carbon going in there. In the cleanest country on earth, I just don't know that it's worth it. And I certainly wouldn't be doing it if I was a 20-year-old person right now. I wouldn't be telling myself that that's a good way to go because I need a job and I need to get my house and I need to fix things. But he doesn't want you to know any of that. He doesn't want you to look at that. They just want to make you scared so you'll vote blindly without thinking your way through the issue.
And then the third aspect is we have this carbon market that's in place, and we have an opportunity so that the large polluters on the marginal reductions that they make, that they can pay for people's climate smart choices. It will end up being a more efficient market for them. The government will stand in the middle and make sure that people have clear incentives, and if we are elected, we will put this in place for home retrofits, for better heating systems, for EVs, and then in that way, the two markets come together. It's better for the country. It's much more efficient, and it will lead to higher and faster reductions.
If you just heard that and you're asking yourself, what exactly did he say? Trust me when I tell you, it's a load. It's a crock. It's a complete bunch of hogwash, as my grandmother might say. What he said, it breaks down like this. He said, first of all, those people that are on those companies that are on the margins that are not reducing, and that means the margins being they aren't reducing carbon enough, can pay a fine to the federal government who stands in the middle. And then the federal government will tell the population that the product from that company is it to be incentivized in the store so that they will have to purchase that. And then he said home retrofits, meaning because Brookfield owns a company that has a different insulation. Now, in Canada, why would we be worried about insulation? Why would we be worried about that? I mean, there's not a house that's not built to a standard already that's very, very cold. And we already know how to stop drafts. And every hydro company in the country already incentivizes keeping drafts down. So what do you actually mean? And then he said more efficient heating systems. So now we've got retrofitting your insulation, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. You got to rip out the walls. You got to do, I mean, it's ridiculous. Of course, it'll make Mark Carney and his friends a lot of money. Then he said retrofitting heating systems. And what is that? You guessed it, heat pumps. He just thinks that he's going to have his heat pump company, because he owns heat pump companies in Brookfield as well. They're going to come through and they're going to change everything. Everybody knows the heat pumps don't work to the efficiency of what you think they do. That if you have a heat pump and you in a region that it becomes certain temperature below zero, you can't get house insurance unless you have a backup. So heat pumps, again, we're back to heat pumps from the Liberal government, like they've been trying to tell us to do for 10 years now. Right back to Mr. Outsider trying to tell us that we should have heat pumps. We should have EVs on top of everything else. So he wants to destroy the Canadian car market. He wants to put a $20,000 tax on any car made that is a combustion engine. I have already watched videos of the car industry asking him to stop doing that. The Liberal government, in the desire to do this, invested tax dollars in 4 battery companies in Canada. 2 of them were in Southern Ontario. Both of those have gotten closed. One was in British Columbia. It's closed. One was in Quebec. It's closed. None of them got off the ground. The company that was thinking about putting it into Quebec has gone bankrupt in Europe. Their main headquarters in Sweden has gone bankrupt. Don't ever think that they're going to be coming in there to putting in that kind of investment. Not to mention the idea that all of those batteries, sooner or later, you're going to have to realize that batteries take a lot of precious metal. They have enormous amounts of copper and whatnot in them. So all of that is going to have to be done on carbon tax. So the amount of electricity that is going to require to build the EV, and then the amount of electricity that's going to be utilized or needed to keep the thing charged in a temperature that does not allow for the battery to maintain its charge. If you leave your car in -7, your battery drains 30% overnight. What about all of the people in his mind that are going to buy these EVs that live in apartment buildings that don't have, I mean, I get it if you live in Edmonton or in some parts of the country where it's cold, you have electricity in your parking lot of your apartment building. Most of the country, though, especially like places like Toronto, they don't have electricity in their driveway, in the parking lot if you live in an apartment building. You might have one in your house or you might have one at your townhouse even, but you're not going to have one, you know, the apartment goes up 20 stories. You just don't have electricity, even if it's an underground parking lot. So the retrofit for the country would be ridiculous. It's an enormous amount of electricity that would be required for the entire country to drive electric cars, not to mention the idea that we don't have the ability to maintain it in cold weather. So forget it if you live in Thunder Bay, you know, forget it if you live in Edmonton or in the Yukon, or I mean, you imagine trying to make it travel in some of these regions with an electric vehicle when you know the destination, the grocery store is what, 100, 150 kilometers from your house. You're trying to get there and back in one shot after you invest enough money to get 2 or 3 months worth of supplies. But you got to do it in an electric car, because if you don't, Mark Carney's coming after you with an extra tax. He's just so out of touch. But what I need you to hear out there, you people that are sitting on the fence, you people that are telling yourself that, oh, he's going to stop Donald Trump. He's exactly like Justin Trudeau, that this is the same liberal policies that have been cramming down our throats for 10 years. And ask yourself, when you go back and you look at how people were feeling about the Liberal Party in December, were they feeling it because of Donald Trump, or were they feeling it because of Justin Trudeau? Or were they feeling it because there was no economy, that the country was going broke, and that the electricity and all of the ESG that the Liberal Party was trying to drive home was making our country, our standard of living, worse? I need you to think about that before you mark your ballot on the 28th of April.
In 2022, the Liberal Party imposed the luxury tax, which impacted the sale of Bombardier jets and the aviation and the aerospace industry, and a lot of high-value production as well. Since you are trying to promote high-value production, Canadian manufacturing, steel, aluminium, is that something that the Liberal Party or you as a Prime Minister will look at revoking or removing?
I'm going to give you a straight answer. It's not something I've looked directly at. Where we have concentrated our efforts is where will we have the maximum impact, and the change to our defense procurement mechanism so we can be much faster and we can be much more Canadian in our defense procurement. Because we are literally going to be spending over $100 billion in defense procurement over the course of the next 5 years. Almost all of that money has been going south of the border. We want much more of it to go north of the border, including back up into Canadian steel. So you see the opportunities. So where we've focused is where we can have a maximum impact. And the question you ask is, yes, right on the margin, but in the grand scheme of things is not, if I may say, that important. And so I haven't looked at it. We haven't looked at it yet. Thank you.
Well, you haven't looked at it yet. You haven't looked at a tax that you put on luxury items that are manufactured no longer in Canada, because Bombardier has manufacturing in Ireland. They have manufacturing in the United States. Yes, they're a Quebec company when the guy Bombardier was from Quebec, but they're not stupid. They know that the tax rates in Canada are far too high for them to be producing anything that will of any consequence, especially since the Liberal government has decided that they have to pay extra for making a plane, or they have to pay extra for making a nice boat or a nice watercraft. Bombardier makes quite a few recreational vehicles that are no longer manufactured inside of Canada because of this quote unquote luxury tax. This guy standing up there trying to tell you that it's all about the military procurement. And so he doesn't care about the taxes that have been put on the luxury items that Canada might be producing. He wants you to think that he's going to be dropping 100 billion of your tax dollars onto Jeeps and other forms of military procurement, which will be far outdated. See, here's the catch-22, right? If the company manufactures the product in Ireland and then tries to import it into Canada, despite the fact that it's a Bombardier company, they're going to say, well, where did you source your steel? And if that same company tries to come out of the United States, they're going to say, where did you source your steel? And as a result of that, they're going to have to manufacture the product in a way that, well, you and I are going to be paying for it. Of course, the Liberal government will then say they don't care if you're having fun with your recreational vehicle because, they're concentrating on military procurement, which of course is just a distraction. He's just trying to say, well, here, look at this shiny item while I realize that your question makes me look stupid, makes our policy look really bad and is going to blow up in our face because we're talking about a Canadian company, a Canadian grassroots company that is now going to be charged additional industrial carbon tax on top of carbon border adjustment because they have taken the productivity outside of the country and we're normally bringing it back in for people to buy it. Or on the other hand, that means that those companies will not be allowed to sell the product inside of Canada. So we won't actually have that industry. What are you talking about here? How is this going to build the economy? You believe that by giving one of your friends the right to make a house, or one of your friends the right to make a Jeep, or one of your friends the right to make munitions, that somehow you're going to stimulate the economy that way? I mean, I know enough to know that that is not going to work. That is not in any way, shape, or form going to work. That's why the Americans can do it, because they'd let anybody do it. If you got the right formulation, you're good to go. That's why there are so many companies in the United States that manufacture these things and then sell them abroad, where those countries don't charge them any form of carbon border adjustment. And appreciate that Europe is trying to militarize right now. So there is a lot of product that is going to be sent into Europe. Yeah, I get there are some countries that are going to make their own stuff, but at the same time, they're going to be needing to source a lot of things that they don't manufacture inside of their own countries. There's a lot of chemicals that go into firearms, a lot of metals and minerals that can only be made and manufactured or sourced in certain countries. But that won't matter to you and I, because Mark Carney's vision for Canada means that we have to follow this ESG and leave 70% of our natural resources in the ground so that our cleanest air, one of the cleanest airs on earth, doesn't somehow get polluted while they crank out dirty steel in the United States or crank out dirty steel in China and sell it all to Europe as much as Europe can buy. That's just such a vision for this country. He was caught off guard by the idea that he's taxing luxury items that are made in Canada by Canadian products, by Canadian manufacturers. I suppose now he went home and probably called up his Brookfield guy and had that Brookfield guy look for an alternative to this product, or tried to buy up all the stock with the hostile takeover. Who knows? What I know is that his idea for making the country grow economically is actually going to go in the reverse. There's going to be no middle class. All of the jobs will look like it does in many of the Central American countries, or many of the African countries that have wealth in them, where they have, the people at the top and then the rest of them scraping and scrounging to try, and get a blood diamond or any kind of resource that they find in there, and they get pennies on the dollar while the government gets all kinds of money for it. That's the idea. That's the vision that Mark Carney and the Liberal Party has for Canada, based on his own words. Those are his answers, not mine. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.